All right, here we go. This is Jeffrey Harris with 411 Mania and the 411 Wrestling Interviews podcast, and I have a confession to make. I am a Jerichoholic, and this is the one and only, the living legend, the Ayatollah of rock and roll, God's gift to professional wrestling, the former uncrowned AEW World Champion, the first AEW World Champion, the first WWE Undisputed Champion, Chris Jericho. Thank you for speaking with me today. This is a great honor and pleasure.
Thanks, man. Quite the intro. You gotta follow me around and say that all the time.
I would take that job if you're looking for a hype guy. All right, so Chris, season premiere of Dark Side of the Ring. I just watched it. I think this was an amazing piece of work, and I'm so grateful that you were a part of it and all the candid interview footage you did for this episode. So I guess, what did you think about Jason Eisner and Evan Husney wanting to tell this story and bringing you on board, and did you have any initial reservations at all once you got started?
No, I didn't, because basically Chavo Guerrero contacted me and kind of got me involved in this, and then once we knew that Chavo was involved and was kind of spearheading the whole thing, that's why I was involved, because I knew if Chavo was doing it, that it would be done properly. And his point was, if we don't do this ourselves, someone else is going to do it, and they're not going to do a good job of it. So we really came together. We got Dean involved and Vicky, and it just came together really well. It was done for the right reasons, by the right people, and I think it's a tremendous look into what really happened from the people that were closest to him. And Eddie.
This documentary, it felt very authentic to me. I appreciated that people like you, Dean Malenko, Chavo, Vicky Guerrero, and also Sandra Toffolini all had prominent interviews in this episode. And I'm so glad this story was told, because I don't think this story has ever really been told in this way, Chris.
No, it hasn't, because it's never been told this way, because the people that were involved had never kind of come together all at the same time to chat about it, to be involved with everything. So I think that when you get David and Sandra and Jericho and Chavo and Dean Malenko, I mean, those are people, Vicky Guerrero, that were closest to Eddie and Chris. So you can't even attempt to do something like this if you didn't have those people involved. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to be involved. If those guys were going to have their say, I wanted to be a part of it as well.
I think going back, all those years ago, 2000, 2001, you the Canadian Chris's, you were my guys. And I just remember that night you guys won the tag team titles against Steve Austin, Triple H. I think a match of the year candidate. It was an amazing night. So I mean, it's such a tough subject. It's even tough for me to talk about right now. But I feel like you can't tell the Chris Benoit story without you, and in my opinion, vice versa. How do you feel about that?
Well, yeah, no, exactly, and that's kind of what I said in the documentary. When I said, when you talked about Chris and his career and how great he was in the ring, it's not glorifying a murderer to talk about that. There has to be a point where you can separate the two and never forget what he did or understand it or not be completely furious about it. But there also is a whole side of him in the ring which was pure genius. And it's something that when I was working in WWE and they would do, I think we did 3 of them of the kind of the Jericho retrospectives on DVD. You can't include those Benoit matches, and they were very important and very much an integral part of my career in the WWE. And those matches will never really be seen again, and it's hard to watch them even if they were. So there's a huge chunk of my career that was affected by that, not just from a friendship level, but from a professional level as well.
I think some of the best parts of this documentary, Chris, we get to hear from Chris Benoit's own son, Daniel Benoit, and Nancy Benoit's sister, Sandra. And I think they were both victims in this whole tragedy as well. And I remember this coverage very clearly, going back 13 years ago. I was at Night of Champions in Houston, Texas, the night Chris Benoit was supposed to wrestle CM Punk, and just being just so devastated. It's tough, but I'm so grateful that we got to hear from Daniel and Sandra to talk about this, and because I feel their story was lost in all of this 13 years ago. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that specifically Nancy, for sure. I mean, Nancy and David were the innocents in this. And, I think Nancy had a huge career behind her that gets forgotten because she is the victim. The wife that was murdered by her husband. But once again, you have to separate her last weekend of her life with her amazing career. She was great at what she did. And I think that should be critically acclaimed and should be spoken about more. So, once again, it's one of those things where a lot of things get affected by this weekend. I mean, David's life definitely changed course huge when this happened to him. So there's a lot of things that we have to remember that are more than just about the death. It's the people that were left behind and the legacies that were left behind that were also tainted forever by what happened.
Sorry, I meant David Benoit, his surviving son. Just because the fact that yeah. I mentioned Daniel earlier. I'm sorry about that.
No, I knew what you meant. I was
okay. Yeah.
David.
I was trying to correct myself, but I'm grateful they had that moment, and you got them together, and David and Sandra were able to sort of have that moment together and just sort of have that realization. I thought, if there's anything that can come of this, I'm appreciative that I thought it was beautiful that they could hug and just embrace each other and have that realization together, and you got to be a part of that, and I guess what sort of inspired you to sort of bring them together at that point?
Well, I mean, I brought them together. I had interviewed Sandra a few years ago for my podcast. I think it was the first time she ever really spoke publicly about what went down, and I wanted to talk to her once again, kind of more about Nancy than about Chris. Obviously the conversation goes there because Sandra was affected as well. But once she kind of came and spoke, because I'd never met her before either, I said, "Do you ever talk to Dave?" And she said, "I have his number." And I said, "Well, here's his number." And I gave her number to David, David's number to her, and they started a relationship. Kind of contacting each other, and it kind of came to a head by both appearing on this show, and I think they've hung out a few times. But I think, if anything, I feel really proud of the fact that I was able to bring them together after they hadn't talked for, I don't know, 10 years or whatever it was at the time. So they should be together because nobody in the world was affected as much as those two were. So it was really gratifying for me to see that they struck up a relationship that still exists to this day.
Now, Chris, your tenure on Season 2 of Dark Side of the Ring is going to continue beyond this episode. You will be the narrator throughout Season 2. Can you share with us how that sort of came together following this episode?
Yeah, basically, I mean, like I said, when Chavo got me involved with the Benoit shows, and then when Evan and the guys came over, they asked me quite a few questions about Owen Hart as well, who's also being profiled on this season. And then they just asked me to narrate it. And I was more than happy to do that because I was really a fan of the show. I watched the whole first season. I liked how they did it. So I felt that it was a really cool thing to be involved in. And I really appreciate the history of wrestling. So I enjoyed the fact that I was involved and learned quite a bit. Was able to kind of see these shows from the ground level up.
Docuseries are really becoming prestige, TV shows as of late. When you think of Making of a Murderer and now a show like this, which I think just by this episode alone, to me, this is like superlative work. And I think it should get awards recognition, in my opinion. What do you think it is that makes this? I think Eisner and Husney did such great work, but what do you think it is about this show that it really taps into these sort of interesting stories and icons of the business?
Well, I mean, like I said, I think there's a lot of stories that if you're a wrestling fan, you kind of have heard before. Obviously there's ones that are more prominent, like the Benoit. I mean, probably the biggest news stories that have happened over the last 25 years in wrestling were the Benoit tragedy and the Owen Hart tragedy. So you know these things, but you might not know everything about it. You definitely haven't heard from the principals involved. But when you talk about like the Brawl for All, for example, Dino Hernandez last season, I didn't really know about these stories. I've heard about them, and obviously Brawl for All isn't a tragedy, but just the whole concept behind it was so interesting. I really enjoy watching these shows. The New Jack show, I had no idea the reign of terror that he went on, in the late 90s, early 2000s. I could give two shits about it. I just thought that was unbelievable how nonplussed he was over these horrible things that he had done. So I, once again, like watching wrestling history. I like seeing it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. And I appreciate how the guys produced Dark Side in that it's very informative. It comes from a source. It's not sensationalistic. It's not garish. It's not doesn't make you feel dirty when you watch it. It's done very classy, I guess you'd say.
I agree.
So it was a pleasure to be asked to be a part of it.
I definitely agree, and there were a lot of things I never knew about. Just about Eddie and Vicky alone that I learned from this episode. Now, Chris, at AEW Revolution, I believe your title was stolen by Jon Moxley, and I think it's a crock that Jon Moxley is celebrated because he basically faked an eye injury, which is dirty as hell. He basically cheated. What do you think about that? That Moxley celebrated and stole your title and faking an eye injury like that, which I think is the dirtiest thing anyone could ever do.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great performance, and Moxley's a great. He's really come to life since he came to AEW, which I really enjoy. I think he's one of the early stars to really break out for us, and one of the best stories that I've been involved in. I'm just glad we were able to pay it off before everything went down, so the focus can be on him as the champion now, and not have to worry about all the excess things that are happening. So good for him, and I'm sure we'll have a great rematch when the time is right, and we'll continue to tear the house down and provide great moments for wonderful people such as yourself.
Chris, you are an icon. You're a living legend. I'm very grateful for this time, and thank you, and congrats on this show. Thank you. Thank you for what you've done with this episode, and I can't wait to see the rest of this season, and I can't wait to see what you do next, man, and just thank you for all the great work you do for us.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you very much, dude. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, and you've been listening to Jeffrey Harris. Thank you, everybody.